Hello. Uh, so I'm gonna call this the book talk or something else. I don't know. But this is gonna be episode 1. And I just wanted to kind of like give an example or an idea. I just wanted to convey my thoughts on some books that I've read. And I've read a fair amount of books so far. So I got all of this, and I have actually a few boxes full of books that I've read. And I'm quite passionate about reading. Reading's really cool. I think a person who reads a lot knows a lot, because reading really conveys ideas very very clearly. The way it just conveys the ideas very clearly. Like if I were to watch a movie, I love movies and I love film, but when I watch a movie, there's a chance I might not hear some dialogue, you know. While if I read a book and I read the dialogue, then I completely understand it. I know exactly what's happening, and I can always go back and just hash out some stuff. And I can also read it at my own pace, so it's just more understandable in general. Personally, I love physical copy books. Um, so some books that I like are this one. So when I was about 19, I was riding motorcycles. Like I rode this one motorcycle. It was a CF Moto 150 NK, and I really liked it. It was really cool. Got a lot of opinions on it, but at the time I bought this Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance book, and it was really about just how to stay calm, how to be patient, how to go on a journey with somebody, and how to maintain your motorcycle. And it was a bit more, for me, a bit more fictional. I mean, I like the book. I haven't read it in a few years now, so I can't really speak too clearly on it, but it was a pretty good book, I remember. And I think it was a bit of a philosophical book, but it wasn't very deep philosophy. It was a bit more easy to understand, I guess. And I have to say, reading this book didn't really teach me how to maintain my motorcycle, because with my motorcycle, the battery died, and then I had to figure out how to take that out. And then I didn't even realize motorcycle batteries were different to car batteries, and they had to be charged like all the time. And and yeah, motorcycle maintenance is a lot more important than car maintenance. I found, because it was a brand new motorcycle, and you just so much happens. It's easy to drop it, and once you drop it, stuff happens. Well, I think Uzumaki by Junji Ito. That was a pretty cool book, because I was pretty into anime back in high school, because my friend group was into anime and mangas, and I read a lot of mangas back then. I read Uzumaki, for example, and that was probably one of the first mangas that I ever actually read, alongside Chainsaw Man. So when Chainsaw Man, I got Chainsaw Man volumes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably up to 7 or 6, and it's funny because when Chainsaw Man came out, the first volume, we were at Kinokuniya in Sydney, and we bought the first volume, me and my friends. And then from then on, I was like, all right, every month I'll wait for the next edition. I'll keep buying it. And that's what I did for like a few months, for about 7 months. And it was a very fun thing to do. It was a very fun thing to do, and I really enjoyed it. Well, so yeah, Uzumaki was a very good read, that one, especially reading it physically. That was probably one of my most favorite mangas to read when I was young. There's also this other manga called Levius, but maybe I can do that for the second um, second edition to this video or whatever. Uh, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. That was a pretty good book. It wasn't amazing or anything. I think it was pretty well rated on Amazon, and a lot of people had bought it, so I was like, all right, I'll give it a buy and I'll try it. And I think actually No Country for Old Men, that movie was adapted from one of his books. So I thought that was pretty cool, and that book was pretty alright. It wasn't crazy or anything. Um, but yeah, I think it's pretty similar to Last of Us, for example. Like, you're in an apocalypse environment, and then you got a bow and arrow maybe, and then just there's people trying to hunt you down. Just the narrative for those kind of stories. I think I have a lot of personal favorites, and surprisingly, not a lot of them are in here right now, actually. I think it's just scattered around because in my living room I've got like a bunch of books as well. But I will say, I got this book here, right here. Robot by Adam. So at the back it says it's one of the most important Polish science fiction novels of all time, and it is very science fiction-y, sci-fi book, and it is a very philosophical book, and I actually really love it because I thought the cover photo was very cool, and and it's got this really cool texture that I can actually feel over it, and on the inside the contents of the book, a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool things happen. I think it talks about the struggle with identity, and it talks about just like conflicts and how nobody understands what's happening. I think in some scenes, suddenly this group of people with guns came around trying to overthrow the whole organization, and that was a very random thing that happened in the book. And I think that's sort of a metaphor for real life because stuff like that happens. Just people trying to overthrow each other, some random people with guns, stuff blowing up. And this love story inside this book was also it was quite centered around the love story inside the book. I forgot exactly what the love story was about, but I have read this book twice in my life so far, and it's a pretty cool book. And I do remember the insides of the book pretty well. It's very sci-fi, and a lot of science terms were used, so if you're a science nerd, definitely read this one. If not, it's still a pretty cool book. And when I was reading it, I thought the ideas behind it were really quite. It had a lot of depth to it. That's what I'll tell. I'll mention Levius and Born Survivors if when I do a part 2 of this video, because both of them are like favorite books of mine. Manga and a book. Levius is a manga, and Born Survivors is a book about Holocaust. So it's very cool, both of them. Got a Japanese dictionary here, because a friend of mine actually bought that. I mentioned that it was in high school. I mentioned to him that I kind of want to learn Japanese, and he was like, because we all love mangas and anime, and he went and bought that for me the next day randomly, and I thought that was a very nice gesture from him. Disgrace, this book over here, Disgrace, by J.M. Coetzee. That book was it was pretty intense, actually. It was quite intense, and unless you read it, you wouldn't exactly understand. But when I bought it, the lady told me that it was intense, and once I read it, I can understand why. I bought Confederacy of Dunks here. I bought this one a long time ago. This one here, Confederacy of Dunks, and I bought this one when I first started reading, so that was when I was about 18. And this one's a really cool book. When I first read it, I really enjoyed it. It's a bit of a funny book. It's super well written, and I'd like to read it a second time, actually. But back then, when I would read books, I would always fold the top to remind myself. I don't do that as much these days, just because I grew out of the habit. But back then, like a lot of the books that I read when I was 18 and 19, I would always fold it to remind myself where I'm at. And I did kind of like doing that a lot because it made me feel like the book was mine. But yeah, this is a pretty cool book, Confederacy of Dunks. I'm glad I read a very good book for one of my first ever few books to read and stuff. I read books when I was growing up, but not very often. And it was something that I really wanted to get into. And a friend of mine motivated me to do so, and I'll maybe talk about it a bit more in the second video. But her dad actually signed his book and gave it to me, and that's what inspired me. And she read a lot of books, and that inspired me, and that's why I read a lot of books. I've I've read a lot of Dostoevsky books. So again, some of them are probably here, but I got Crime and Punishment here, and I got Brothers Karamazov. I got The Idiot as well, and I have The Underground as well, and a few other Dostoevsky books. I think his books are pretty good. I'm not a massive Dostoevsky fan. I just read his books because they're very famous and well known. I would probably say I've read all of them once entirely, and but they take forever to read. I mean, they're like 700 pages, and in one page there's a lot of words, probably equal to 3-4 pages of these other books, just in one page. So these are really quite massive books to read. And the Brothers Karamazov, that took me a while. That was a very good book, I thought, because it spoke about Soviet culture and stuff back then. And I grew up in, well, probably next time. But yeah, The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, that was pretty good. And I really like Crime and Punishment. So both of those books I would probably read again. The Idiot, I read through halfway and I just couldn't really get into it. I can see why it was pretty well written, but I just couldn't really get into it. I will say Dostoevsky books, I think there's this bad narrative tied to them saying, oh, if you read them, then you're so and so, and it's like stereotyping and stuff. But I disagree, and I do think these are really good storybooks in all seriousness. Because yes, it has some philosophy behind it, but really, it's got a whole narrative inside it and a whole story in all of his books. And there's a clear story with clear characters, with clear events happening. And you could really just read it for the story. Like, I probably really read it just for the story. I got some ideas out of it because it is sort of has philosophical ideas, but not very massive. So yeah, if you're into stories and stuff and you just want to read about people and stuff, then yeah, definitely read Dostoevsky books. Franz Kafka, I think I read maybe a few of his books, a few, maybe like 2 or 3 maybe. Metamorphosis, probably his most famous book. That was pretty good. I really enjoyed that one. Um, yeah, it's a bit of an analogy on just being unable to provide and work anymore, and then now all the people you provided for is able to work now, and then you just kind of left to the dust, and all this time you're doing nothing for nothing. But it's a bit of a funny book. I liked it. Some of these books are secondhand, so yeah. I mean, I don't mind at all, but I really like buying secondhand. I also like buying, firsthand. Doesn't bother me either way. Um, I've actually read a lot of Friedrich Nietzsche books. So this one, Human All Too Human book right here, that one I've read ages ago. Um, Very good books. I will say I was kind of surprised with Friedrich Nietzsche books because unlike Dostoevsky, where it's got like full-on stories and you can really read it just for the stories, the Nietzsche books are really just like segments on segments on segments of ideas, and that's what all like his books really are about. I've got another of his book. Yep. So I got Human All Too Human by him. I've also got Friedrich Nietzsche Beyond Good and Evil. I read both of them, and yeah, it's both of them. It's just got excerpts on excerpts on excerpts of just ideas, just nonstop. So there's no stories or anything involved, just ideas, which is kind of like Meditations by that famous philosopher from back in the day, which is just dot points of ideas. So yeah, there's that. Um, I will say, oh, this book, Checkmate in Berlin by Giles Milton, that was a really cool book. I really enjoyed that one. This one here, that was a cool book, and it's got photos inside, and I really like that one. Um, Radium Girls here by Kate Moore. That was a bit of an interesting book for me. It was about these women who got poisoned by radiation during World War I, and it was very descriptive. There were genuine photos involved, and I love reading about history. And so that was really fun. I read the book Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and that was an awesome book. Reading about Frankenstein, like in its original copy, was a bit of a mind bender because I didn't realize Frankenstein was a complex, intelligent creature, I suppose. And really, he is. And the whole book is really interesting. And if you haven't read Frankenstein yet, you really should read it, because I think in like public media they really dumped him down to be like this big blob of a monster, but in the book he's really not. He's read all the famous books and stuff. He's actually read like Sorrows of Werther here, which is insane because it was written like 200 years ago, and then they mentioned that in the book it mentions that Frankenstein, to become better illiterate, he read, for example, Sorrows of Werther by this guy. This one I studied a course back when I was 18, and it was like a classic literature book, and that's kind of how I read Kafka and this. And it's a bit of a interesting book. I actually haven't read it since then, so it's been a few years now. But yeah, in Frankenstein, it mentions some famous books like Love and Peace or Love and War by Leo Tolstoy, I think, like that famous book. So he's read like all these famous books. So he's kind of like using law and legal action to like screw people over, and then like Frankenstein's a smart dude. Like he's not just killing random people. He's like framing them for murder and stuff, and then having other people kill them. Like it's a very interesting. Like yeah. Unless you read Frankenstein, like you just don't understand. But yeah, got a lot of books here. I might talk more about him. And I love that I've read all of my books here, because I don't really like buying new books unless I've read all the books that I have. There is a small backlog I have now. Like out of all the books I have, I probably have like a little over a dozen that I haven't read yet. But it's a drop in the bucket, and I'm kind of getting through them now. I'm reading them all, and I'm getting there. But here, everything here I've read it, and all of my other books I've pretty much read it. And I like that. I was gonna say I like that I've read them all and I know them, because I can go like in chronological order and go, when I was 18 I read that and that and that, and I was doing this and that, and it kind of jogs my memory pretty well. I would like to find like an app or a website like Letterboxd where I can rate and review books, and then just like put my opinions and thoughts on them, and then just like that'd be really fun in my opinion. I did for a little while, just for a few books, write like on a piece of paper about the book what I thought of it after I finished it, and I stuck it in. And I might do that for all of my books, because I do remember a good amount of them. But yeah, a lot of these books I would honestly read it a second time, like half of these books at least. So I'm pretty happy about my collection, because I've got like a wide array of like books. I mean, a lot of them are philosophy, I guess, but a lot of them are like really story-driven narrative books, and I really enjoy them. I think I think a fair amount of my favorite books aren't exactly here. Like Don Quixote is probably one of my favorite books ever, and it's not here. And so yeah, definitely there's gonna be a part 2 of this video, and I'll tell you a bit more about those books, and I'll tell you, and maybe in a part 3 I'll tell you about some more of these other books. But until then, toodaloo. All right.